Okay, so what we've done, we've unbanded. We're quite happy how it's all looking and everything else like that. So we've gone around and we checked, and all we've done is sand down quite roughly leading edges to get rid of tabs and things like that. So we've got no bits sticking out, and we can see if there's any joints. Now obviously we've got one running down the back here, quite a nasty one. Around here, what I've done is rescribed it again, just because we obviously lost a lot of the detail running across the back. Rescribing it before we go with filler just gives us an idea where it all is. Okay, so what we're going to do, we've got a normal paintbrush. You don't want to use your best one for this one. Use quite an old one. And what we've got here is some Mr. Surfacer. It says 1200 on the bottom. I'm actually using the 1000. Okay, so then all we do, we have it over here. And all we're going to do very carefully is just brush it down the seam lines. Now we're not trying to totally get rid of them. What we're trying to do is just highlight any problems we might have, and it will just give us a more of a smoother finish to the paintwork and things like that. So that's why we're just going to pop around all of these and make sure, and this will just act like a little tiny bit of filler when you're using it and things like that. So what we're going to do is obviously on these, where we went around these fan areas, obviously we've sanded them off quite roughly, but now we want to go round and make sure we're all happy that they're laying nicely. So we're just going to pop around these areas and make sure they're all okay. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to carry on with this a minute, then what we'll do, we'll let it dry for sort of half an hour, totally go off. And when it's gone totally off, then what we can do, we can come around and sand it off, rescribe any little areas we need, and really start bringing it together. We can get the glass work and things like that. But we want to get these bits done. So exactly the same underneath it as well. So don't forget your bits around tails, just down in here. These little bits all here. They're all little areas where you tend to forget about underneath, but they're quite important to do. And by doing this, as I said, it just really makes it a lot easier. And this stuff dries very, very quickly as well. So hopefully it won't be around too long before we can actually get on with getting some paint on. Where if you used to go around with a bit of filler, you'd have to wait a bit of time for it all to dry and bits and pieces like that. So I say, I'll carry on putting this all over all the joints. Now this one's been drying now for about sort of an hour, and as you can see probably on the close-up, these are all nice and dry, no problem at all. So what we're going to do, instead of rushing in here with like a normal file and things like that, you want to keep with quite a soft one. So what we got here out of the actual sanding set is the nice soft one. So this one here is the 240 grit, and all we're going to do is very lightly just run over. And what it'll do is just take off the top side and the rough areas, and then if there is any dips in there, so I've got just a little few down here, you won't be able to see on the close-up, then that'll show them up and you can see how much you're going to need. Now hopefully by just using the very fine one as we're doing here, you'll be able to run around all these areas and just gently sand off and then sand into the plastic to remove any raised bits. So there we go, that's that done. Now because we've used quite a fine one, sort of the 240 grit, obviously we haven't got any mass scratching in here. So what you can use now is the buffer. Now this is the polishing one, so you've got two sides. Obviously you've got the gritted side on the green, and then you've got the white. You're probably not going to need the white because that's really for giving a total perfect finish. But what this will do, and don't wet it at all, just let it go round and just gently polish it in. And what this will do is take rid of all the scratches out and puff it up, and it will make it just about perfect for, you know, priming up and all the rest of it. If you wanted to, you could use the white side, which really doesn't do much at all. What it will do is literally squeak polish it up, and really that's designed for doing more sort of clear parts and things like that. And so as you can see, what we're going to do now is just work our way around. You might be able to see a little bit of a shine on the bottom here where it's polished it absolutely lovely. And that is totally smooth, extremely shiny. So what we've got is obviously around these air intakes and things like that. Same thing, there's going to get just a sand over with the buffer and with the light one first, just to take off any high bits, which this will do. Then the other one will just polish them in and get rid of any scratching and things like that. So what we're going to do now is work our way around all of these ones, all these back seams and things like that. And as I say, don't go gouging it in. Just take your time, enjoy it, sit in front of the telly, whatever you need to do. And literally we're just going to buff all these out right the way round. Then, as I say, we're just going to come around with this one, a whip round, and this will just finish this off and give us a nice scratch-free surface all ready for priming. Okay, so we're all totally dried off now, and what we've actually done, as you can probably see here on the close-up and normal one, these little black marks, now what it is, they're quite what I call crucial areas where I want to look at, and obviously we sanded and using a little bit of the Mr. Surfacer, we've gone round, or you could just use normal filler and just having a look at these seams, and really it's just to give me a better idea if I need to get real back in there with filler or perhaps with some super glue, or if we're almost there and we can just get away with some light sanding and rescribing. So that's why I've got those on there. Apart from that, pretty much all went together okay. Let's say these are just the noticeable ones, if you like, at the top. This one down here at the front I wouldn't worry about too much, because obviously with things like that it's going to be covered up, as you're going to see in a minute, with a photo etch plate anyway, so we're not too concerned about that one. But certainly this one down the back here is obviously the noticeable one. A couple of little points to make out. Down here, obviously you've got a different type of wingtip for this particular type of Harrier. So there's an injection moulding line running down there. There again, don't go sort of piling in there with filler and things like that. You can actually get away with using some sanding sticks. I just buffed them out lightly, and then we went along with a polisher and we just polished it up to make them all sort of nice around this area here. So they're just little things that you can take care of. Okay, up on the front, as you see, we've done the cockpit area and we've painted that black, and then the glass part in the middle there, we've actually done green. That's just a little bit green XF25 in there, just takes care of that, and we're quite happy how that one is. Now, talking about the photo etch parts, as we just were, obviously this back area here, we've got a photo etch plate that's going to go on there. Now there is a slight curve into it. There's two ways of putting this on then. You can either pre-curve it as I've done here, so I've got my photo etch pliers, which are the nice flat plate ones, matched it up, seen where it is, put it in, giving it a slight tap to slightly curve it down, and then this will go on. And then what we'll do in a moment, what we're going to do, bit of super glue underneath, and we're going to band it up so it pulls it all in nice and tight. What you want to do is make sure you're nice and clean metal underneath and on here, so the super glue's got something to stick to, because it's going to be always trying to bend up the other way. It will just stop it from sort of lifting up. So make sure your paintwork's clean underneath. Give it a sand of a medium sanding stick. Just going to go in here first, and what this will do, it just gives something for the super glue to bite to, because as I say, without it, what's going to happen is you're going to stick that on in a moment and it's going to give us all types of problems. At the same time, we've done the actual heads-up display. Probably see them just here, the little framework for it. Now these are going to go on the side, so what's going to happen is they're just going to super glue in. Don't worry about putting the clear parts in yet, because we'll paint it first and we'll slide the glass in afterwards. At the same time of doing all of those as well, you might see here, we've got the front canopy, which is obviously going to fit right on here. We've masked it up. Now, the trouble with that is, and if we show you over here, we've got this one down here, it's got a centre seam. You might be able to see it running right down the middle. Two ways of doing that. Obviously what we do, we just grab a bit of putty, just like this, okay? Now the reason for popping this in is that in case you over pinch or something down, so just lightly pushing, don't go in there squashing this in, otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to crack it, get some crazing going on in here. But what it'll do, it'll just support this little bit of weight running down here. As I say, there's the photo etch, not photo etch, but there's an engraving of the detonation cord, which is the liney part that goes down in here. That's in there already. So what we do, all we do, come along, not with a coarse sanding stick, this is quite a fine one, okay, I'm just going to work our way through, take off that centre seam, so we're going to make a bit of a mess of all of this, but what you want to do is make sure it's gone. Now you can scrape it, I know a lot of people pop in with a knife and things like that. Personally, I'm more of a sand it type of off guy than a scrape the living daylights out. But what you do, you catch it on the light and you want it all to be dull. If you've got any little shiny areas, you've still got a little bit of a step you're going to have to get rid of. Okay, so once you're in, you've gone in there just like that, and then obviously you're just going to work, if you've got sort of my sanding sticks, say you've got the tri-grit ones, things like that, so then all you do is start with the pink one, wet it slightly, okay, right the way over the top. And we're just going side to side for the moment. Don't worry about going one angle then the other, things like that. For the moment we're just trying to get rid of all the scratching and things like that. So we just pop round the outside like this. And when we're happy they're all gone, all the scratches. We're going to move on to the white side. So now all we're going to do is pop in with the grip from the white one. There again, we're all going in the same direction, and if you just wet it a touch, it'll just help it sort of smooth around and things like that. Now there is polishing compounds on the market you can buy. I've got some here. This is the Tamiya one. You don't necessarily need to have it, but it will just help you get a nicer finish on the go and things like that. So all we do is grab a little bit of compound, goes on there using the white side, and we're just smoothing this all round. Little rotations. Okay, just all over. Just like so, and that will get rid of. Now we've got the leather side on here, but in some ways that's too fine. So I've got the polishing stick. Okay, so all we're going, we're just going to go in here, and what we're listening for is a squeak. Now when it starts to squeak, there's timing for you, like that. What it is actually polish the surface. It's not very gritty on the surface, and there's no massive scratches, otherwise you wouldn't hear the squeak because it's got nothing to polish up to. So all we do, we're just going round and round and round and polishing up like this over to the leather side or the white side on here, and all we do is keep going round. And obviously this is a quick one. Normally this can take up to sort of half an hour polishing. It's a good one to do in front of the telly. Okay, but we can, hopefully I'll be able to show you in a second what we've got. So we're just going to pop in here. But this white side, if you use it for anything else, it's very hard to see that there's anything going on with this. But actually when you get going with it on a clear thing, you can really see the difference that this does. This really does polish up and make it look very nice. Now this is just a quick job, so if this isn't right, we're obviously going to pull that very carefully, remove it from the surface, and obviously we've got the glue underneath and things like that, and this will all have to be polished up by hand in a moment, but you might be able to see if we bring you right in on the close-up, we have no centre seam left in there. Then normally use a bit of cloth or something like that. I'm just going to use a bit of moisture and a towel here just to buff this off a bit. And obviously we've got to do the inside. There again, be very careful when you're dealing with glass parts like this, because over push it, it'll crack. So there we go. Hopefully you can see no more centre seam, very shiny, and we're okay. And I'll be quite happy to stick that on. There's no scratches. But what we're going to do, we're going to put a little bit more polish on here like this, just very lightly and very, very gently. We're just going to keep polishing this up all over the actual one, just to polish it up. Now I know a lot of you will say about what about dipping into Future and things like that. The only time I dip into Future is if it's really not looking good, i.e. it's got some scratches on there and things like that. The reason I don't like dipping into Future, which is this stuff, is that what it has a nasty habit of doing, over some time it goes cloudy, and obviously on clear parts that is not a good look. But there we go, hopefully you can see that on there. That's all polished up, and I'll be quite happy to use that on the model just now. You can probably see on the close-up that we've actually got the HUD installed. Pretty straightforward. As I say, photo etch parts go on, and then literally we just slide the clear parts in there, and obviously we've painted up front. You can probably see on the close-up the back plate is in, pushed down, a couple of rubber bands just held that in place and then cleaned it up afterwards, and obviously you can just see there's just a little bit of dry brushing just to see what it would come up like. Okay, the main rear part of the cockpit is actually masked up now after polishing, and we've put that on with a little bit of glue, which I'll show you now. So what we've got here is just some gator glue, which I quite like. It's my sort of glue of preference, and then we can put on this front windscreen now, which will sort of finish this area up. Big thing to remember is make sure you get rid of any little bits of dust and things that you've got going on down here. Keep it clean, and especially on the inside of the glass as well. Not best to use you know, obviously a little bit of bounty or anything where you're going to get hairs left behind, otherwise you leave them in. So clean t-shirt is always a good one. So we just give that a polish up. Happy how it all is. Okay, so we've got some gator glue, and the way I do this is to literally, you just sort of roll it around and scrape it on the bottom. Okay, now if you've got new pot of gator glue, what I tend to do is just give it a few minutes to go off, for want of a better word, to just literally harden up a bit. You don't want to over glue this, but certainly we need to make sure we've got enough going on there. So we do, we put nice even amount all the way, right the way round like this. Okay, we just pop these out of the way. And then we're going to sit it on. So what we do, just let it dry off just a fraction, just let it bite, and just wipe off any excess by sort of scraping inward, sort of like this. Okay, and then all we're going to do is come along and we're going to sit this on. So as I say, it's just one of those ones where we want to sit it on as straightforward and as fast as possible and get it in there. Push it to the front. Have a quick look around to make sure we're even, which we're not. We just need to come over a little bit. Okay, and just generally check that it's sitting correctly and then you're all happy of how it is. So as I say, just make sure, oops, you don't do that, and obviously peel it back off again. Just make sure it's sit in there and you've got no massive gaps all the way round. Just like that. Give that a few minutes just to start to set really. We bring Right, just to bring you up to speed, what we've actually done is I've installed the gun, as you can probably see here, onto here already. Now, various things about doing it now and afterwards. One is obviously getting a nice seam line round the entire model. Obviously going to go around with glue afterwards. There might have been a gap and I didn't want to really worry about it. The only thing is obviously the crossover plate, and for those of you who don't know, what happens is there's only one gun, one's a fake. What it actually contains is all the ammo. So the ammo then feeds from this one, comes down along this bottom plate here, across into this one, is fired and then returned, empties, go back, there it is. But this plate here just doesn't sit right. So what I actually did, cut the locating tabs off, put the skids on and then dropped it in afterwards and then put them on like that. But that way, what happens is it's just going to be a lot less messy a bit later on when we come to be actually getting on with the actual installing of various things like the wing parts and that we can get away with. The other thing I've just taken care of now is really at the front here you might be noticing the little puffer jets. And now these are the bleed air is taken from the main engine and comes down the puffer jets which are on the wingtips. They should have one on the nose and certainly one on the tail, and that's how the aircraft's controlled in the hover. Unfortunately, there isn't one on the nose, and it should be right here, just in front of this panel line, running along for this new nose. So it's obviously been forgotten of. Various ways of doing this one. The easiest way I find to do this is to literally, we're going to pop a hole right in the middle of where we want it to be. So we're just going to take our time, neatly put a little hole just going down in here. And I'm using a little pin vise with just a 1mm drill bit. Okay, so we've just made the little hole, and then what we're going to do, it's a small little rectangle if you look at some reference photos, but it's just a little one. So what we'll do is we're just going to put another one to one side of it. Okay, and this is what we call drilling out via holes, which is a very nice, easy way to do this without making too much of a mess. So we just pop 3 little holes in here like this. Okay, just like so. So there's our 3 little holes. We bring you a little bit, as you can see. Then you can either come along with a knife, or whichever way you'd like to do this. But what you should be able to do now is cut down through them. And obviously, what we want to try and do is get these parts out. So there we go. There's the start of the hole. And then what we'll do, we're just going to trim our way in and cut a little puffer jet into here. As I say, it's just a little rectangle box. It's a little bit bigger than this one is at the moment, but what I'll do is I'll continue trimming this out. As you can probably see, you very quickly end up with a hole, and obviously you can get in here with a file to clean this up and so forth, but it needs to have this little hole, otherwise you're going to look a little bit silly, because it is quite noticeable because it does hang at the front. And it's quite thick plastic here. See, as soon as you get your hole going like that, it's not too bad, and you get a little puffer jet. And as you see, you can see from the ones on the wingtips and things like that, it's just going to go in. So we'll clean that up, tidy it up with a little tiny file just to widen it up, make sure we're all okay, get it roughly into scale of how we actually want it. But that gives you a little one, but we do need to have that on there. As I say, I can't put this one down yet. As you can see, we've masked up the top. There again, quite important to get that all masked up, covered up, and we've got our sponges actually now cut and input into there, and then obviously you might be able to see them in here, and that just stops all the overspray going down in there. We've been around, we've checked up everything. You can see we've now installed the flaps and the ailerons there in there. I'm just about to pop the tail on now. So the tail will just come in. It's going to sit just in like that, and obviously we've got the actual tail planes as well, but because obviously we have those a loose fit, they're going to go on afterwards. We can spray them as a separate. The only thing I am going to do is I'm going to quickly spray up white just down in here, and then we can have that closed up with a little bit of blue tack, because obviously it will just be a pain trying to paint that afterwards. Certainly with the door wells, I'm not going to worry about them. For anyone who actually knows, the Harrier doors open and then close afterwards to stop any debris from obviously the engines going up into the wheel well. So the actual Harrier at rest doesn't have these open. These have to be forced open. So obviously we're not going to worry about it. We can have them open to show some of the nice detail off perhaps, but the reality is unless the actual aircraft has manually had these doors open for the bottom one, you don't have to worry about it. So there we go, we're all done. The air refueling probe, sorry, is the only other thing that's been popped on, and obviously we've got the intakes, they're all on there. So now what we're going to do, we're going to clear all of this away, get it all tidied up, get the cameras changed over in the spray bay, and we can get on with some painting. Okay, so as you can see, we're over in the spray bay now, got everything cleaned down. We've gone around and just tidied up all the little areas, so we've made sure we've got no filler dust and things like that in all the panel lines. So we've just given it a blow around with the airbrush and a wipe down all the plastic to make sure there's no sort of nasties and greasy fingerprints, marks and things like that. So we're all in a nice smooth type of finish. Now you might be able to see up here at the butt front, we've done all the black work. What that basically is, we spray it just flat black, neat from the airbrush. Straight all over, just any clear parts. What that actually does is give you a depth onto the clear parts. If you obviously use to spray grey straight on it, it might be a little bit clear and a little bit see-through, especially with the light behind it. Putting the black on there serves two purposes. First of all, it gives it a nice thick colour for it to sit on, so when the grey's on, it looks like a solid piece and not like a clear piece. Obviously from the inside as well, when we look at it from the inside looking out like this, it's black, and that's the type of colour we want. So it saves us having to mask up the inside and do it like that. As you probably see, we've done a couple of areas elsewhere, and that's just me, had a bit of paint left over and just checking all those little bits to make sure they're all fine. We've just sprayed things that are going to need to be dark areas, just like things in the gun, in these little the little puffer jets and things like that. So what we can do now is get on with some painting. In here I've got mixed up already is a 50-50 mix with Tamiya acrylic grey. Now I tend to use any type of acrylic grey that I've got tend to be sort of lying around. So in this case it is XF83. It's the new Tamiya neutral type of grey, RAF grey. So just let that come through. What we do, we just add up a little bit. Okay, quite a thick mix because we want to have a nice texture for it to stick to. Now obviously I've got an extractor here, that's on and drawing out. So what we can do now is basically just run around everywhere and just give this a coat on. Now this is quite a gritty, not a very smooth coat, because obviously we want the paint for something to stick to, and obviously we just want it to cover up as we go. So what we're going to do is going to run this down, first coat just like this. Just keep it nice and even with your spraying. Okay, what we're going to do, we're just going to work along this wing. Just like so. Okay, then we're going back up. And you see it's quite a rough coat for the moment. Right the way all over the clear parts. And I'll just keep going around everywhere, just with this mix as we go. Okay, so that's that one done now. We handle this carefully, it's still a little bit wet. So now what we can do is have a look round and make sure we haven't got any seam lines that are out of place, panel lines which are very, very obvious, joins, glue marks and all those things as you might expect. So going around and checking it all now, we seem to be all okay, quite happy with how it all is. And say it's quite a rough coat of primer on there like that, but say it gives it something to stick to, and if there is any sort of residue or oil or fingerprints on that, it won't worry about it too much. So what we're going to do now is give it another coat, but this is going to be a lot wetter. Now this will be a far, far smoother coat. So what we'll do, we're putting a mix here, and all we're going to do is about, instead of being 50-50 mix, it's probably around about 70% thinners, 30% paint. Good old mix. Alright, and you'll probably hear as it starts to come out, it will come out a lot faster, a lot easier. And obviously that's because the paint's being atomised far easier. So here you go. So what we're going to do, straight on, nice wet coat onto the entire model. It'll look a lot wetter as we're putting it on and everything. All the way down the side there. So what we'll do, we'll handle this one side then the other. So we'll just pop that onto the side. Okay, so turning around. Quite handy, you can handle the nose. Okay, and we start our back. Go out to the front. Just go like that, and we can do the bottom in a moment when that's dry. So we'll just flick the extractor on, a bit foggy here. Just clear that. Right, that one's been dry now for about sort of half an hour. Quite happy. It's quite rough to the touch, but obviously, you know, that's something we can take care of in a moment. You can actually put down a wet coat and that'll gloss it up slightly, but we want it to be a nice dead flat finish. Now, I don't remember when we first started this, I did mention that, you know, the type of effect we wanted for this one was to be a really nice flat, dead type of look to the paintwork. And obviously that starts around about now. First coat of primer went on, it was quite rough. This one's quite a softer one. It's done its job, it's hidden a multitude of little tiny little sins, certainly little glue marks and that, they all go no problem under a good coat of primer. What it also does now, when we put the next couple of coats of paint on, they're going to work their way through. So if you were looking for a nice glossy finish and everything else, this needs to be glossy, and you build up as glosses. Because we want this to be very flat, very dead type of look to the paintwork, we want it to be very flat now. Now this isn't rough, sort of sandpaper rough, but you probably hear it's quite coarse. So, you know, that's going to help because that's going to transfer now. We're going to put some pre-shading on in a moment, and when the next coat of paint goes on, they're going to be flat because obviously it's carrying through the process. Obviously when we come to decaling and things like that, that's going to take a little bit more because obviously we need it to conform, and this is where you're going to get silvering. But it's an effect we're trying to go for, and hopefully I'll show you how to get round sort of silvering and that in a moment. So what we're going to do, we want to start off with our first little bit of weathering here. So as I said before, we're going to use pre-shading. Now pre-shading is very, very simple. Basically, it's a shadowing effect. So what you do, you actually put your black paint down, we're going to airbrush it on in a moment, in all the crucial areas. So things around flat, large panel lines, obviously areas where you're going to get dirt, anywhere that really needs to show grime and stuff like that. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to, got our paint here. Okay, so thin is always in first, so we're going to put in milliliter of thinners to probably 1 mil of paint. Okay, that's in, and then a good old mix up. Okay, let's get that all going, and then what we're going to do, turn our air pressure to around about a sort of 20 psi, 25 psi. As we got here, and this will give us a working line, something like this, as you can see, which is ideal for what we need. So I'm going to orientate it so it's just easier for me to see it. Okay, and then all we're going to do, very simply, is just going to work around the big areas. So obviously things around, perhaps we've got flaps down here, ailerons, and these large panel lines obviously need quite a bit. So what we're going to do is start on them on. just like so. Now the thing is, don't worry about it being a perfectly straight line, don't worry about the thickness being the same, because it's a shadowing effect. So obviously the more random it is, the better it'll look. And I know I say this a lot, but obviously if it's a perfect straight and grid effect as you put it on, it will show through as being too universal. And as we know, all weathering, there's a certain amount of differences. Literally, it could be one side would be totally different weather to the other. So don't worry about it too much. So we've done that one there. We're just going to pop along the major panel line. So we're going to make it a little bit wiggly. Just like that. And that way that will transfer through. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go absolutely everywhere where there's a panel line. And if it's a big thick panel line, I'll give it a lot of paint. If it's quite a thin one, I'll give it a little bit. So we just carry this on. Like so, absolutely everywhere. And if you come back in a minute when I'm finished, I can show you a little other technique about laying down some weathering.